ones they warned you about. I'll see the watch my bed, calling of the sun. Like footsteps to the sea, they dance upon the rising sun. Thousand angels singing, Lord, it fills my soul. Louder and louder, I hear the engines roar. Faster and faster, echoes on the turn. Tighter and tighter, on the lightning flash. Closer and closer, you know you almost so great. And the whole again. Machines that make their rounds, don't care if they ever see the dawn. Every peaceful flowing river, after the winter's come and gone. Yeah, I feel weak and wounded, long little second song. Lay on, lady at the wheel, holding roses and plants and thorns. Louder and louder, hear the ancients roar. Faster and faster, fables of the turn. Tighter and tighter, on the lightning flares. Closer and closer, you know your wall is so great. And the whole again. This girl they carried out the door had a rope around my neck. Lay him on the table, come on, put some line.
This is a friendship that'll never ever end.
Hello and welcome to Old School Watch Party Sundays. How's everybody doing this evening? I hope you're doing well. I am Winning Reality, and this with me, as always, is Shelly, aka T3. How you doing, everybody?
Hey guys, how are you? I love your intro. It always makes me happy.
Oh, that's awesome. The sliding in sideways here, man. Just came off a big win, a tight game. Props to the New England Patriots for putting up a huge fight today. It came down to the last play of the game, and that's good football right there. But the Eagles managed to squeak out a victory today in a very back and forth game. So you'll be getting your football updates here on this Eagles report every Sunday. And I'll have to schedule this better. So when the 4 o'clock games are on, we'll start at 8, and when the 3 o'clock games are on, we'll start at 7. So and I'll try to keep that in mind. I mean, maybe 8 o'clock's a good time. We got a lot of people here already. So if you guys like 8, I'll tell you what, I'll put a poll out there and we could talk about whether 8 or 7 is better for the crowd, because it's all about you guys, because you show up and make it happen. And let's shout out to our front row people, the ones that are here in the front row. Daisy girl, as always, thank you so much for being the first in the door and being right up front next to the stage. See me later. How's it going, dude? Thank you so much for being here. Caitlin, how you doing? Caitlin comments. Yes, let's go.
Hi,
thank
honey.
you for being here. Hey,
Hi, everybody.
Alexander. Ahoy, Alexander. I hope I'm saying that right. Jacob Peets, my man. How's it going? Cool Gamer, thank you for being here. T-Rex Trucking, my man. How you doing, dude? Thanks for pulling on in. Rabbit, you rock. Mwah. How you doing? Thank you so much for being here. All right, we got the crowd in the house. Everybody on Rumble, thank you for being here as well. I'm getting my Rumble chat popped up. Won't you say hi, T3?
Hi guys. It's not often that I get to be so quiet on a stream, but I just want to say hi. Hi, Rabbit. How are you? Yeah, no, I'm not happy with you winning at all. At all. The Eagles, really? I have spent
Hey,
30 years hating the Eagles, and now I got to be nice about it.
yep.
Really? I'm
Hey, what's up,
surrounded
Macor?
by Eagles fans. That's not fair. That's not fair. My mother, her husband, my exes, Jesus, my best friend. Like, what the hell? And now you. That's
Yep,
great.
that's the way it
That's
goes.
great.
That's the way it
Yeah,
goes.
no.
Look, welcome, Madcore. How you doing, buddy? Caitlin,
It's
thank you so
alright.
much for the $5 super chat. I got to give it to the Eagles, man. That was a hell
Aw.
of a game. Let's go with Sunday Fun Day.
Sunday
Absolutely,
fun
absolutely.
day, baby.
Yeah, today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of and the evolution of propaganda and public relations in the United States. Okay, this film explores the evolution of propaganda and public relations in the United States with an emphasis on the elitist theory of democracy and the relationship between war, propaganda, and class.
Hmm.
Lots of cool interviews in here, a deeply, richly illustrated study in the nature of history and propaganda, featuring some of the world's most insightful critics. PsyWar exposes the propaganda system, providing crucial background and insight into the control of information and thought. Now, PsyWar is an old school documentary. Let me see. Do I have the year it came out? I don't think I have the year it came out. I got to find this out. But it's back in the day. Trust me on that one. I'll get the year out there. And this is one of those. This is one of the ones that I recommended a lot to people back in the day. I did. This was always a link that I shared out to people to help them understand why the media was lying to them. Hey, Shinagram, welcome. How you doing? Had a great time
Someone
streaming
got
with
a
you last
super
night.
chat.
We did get a super chat. T-Rex
Mhm.
fucking $10. Must engage with the content. Alan, did you see the Browns whoop the Bengals today? Made me happy. Yes, they sure did. They really did. Man, they put a hurting on those guys. Hey there, you two. I'm glad I got to meet you last night at Winning Reality and to hear you last night, T3. Yes, it was a pleasure to meet you, ma'am. And I'm so happy you've joined us for this watch party today because we're going to have a lot of fun. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well,
And at
you've
the end, we're,
seen these, right?
yeah, it's been a while.
Because
I'm excited.
I know nothing, guys.
Yep. I'm excited
Nothing.
to
So I'll
rewatch
rereact.
this. I'm
Mhm.
excited to rewatch this because I haven't seen it in a long time, but I do remember loving it. I probably seen it 10 times at least in my life, but it's been a long time. Yeah, Jacob Peets, I think you're right. It's around 2006, probably. I'll
Hey,
look it
Jake.
up while we're getting started here. But I want to go ahead and it's not let's see, how long is this one? That doesn't matter, does it? Because we're gonna watch the whole dang thing. It's about an hour and a half, so it's not too bad. And then we're gonna at the end, we're gonna talk about Operation Mockingbird. And we're gonna have a report from Tucker Carlson on that. So very interesting uh, modern day call to this actual material right here. Did it ever stop? Doesn't seem like it. Keep an eye out for Winning and I tried to grift last night. Tina Nina. Tia Nina.
Tia Nena.
Tia Nana. Okay. I don't know who that is. I'm trying to remember. Did I?
I'm trying to remember if you tried to grift her last night.
I don't know. I don't know.
A
I wanna
lot
grift
was going on last night. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's pull this baby up and get going. You guys ready? All right. Boop. And we're off with the volume up.
that's good. That's right. It's silent in the beginning, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are. Enjoy the show. Oh, I gotcha.
Here in the United States, we're often brought up and told we don't have propaganda, that we have a hard-charging investigative press, we have this educated, skeptical, even cynical citizenry, and that if there were powerful interests trying to manage and manipulate public opinion, they would be exposed. The reality actually is just the opposite. Academics like Alex Carey and others who've spent their lifetimes looking at how propaganda works finds that it's actually in Western democracies and open societies where you need the most sophisticated sorts of propaganda. And since World War I, thanks to people like Ivy Lee and Eddie Bernays, propaganda has become a business, this business of public relations. Or as one of the firms that has often represented dictators, the Burson Marsteller firm puts it, their business is perception management, to manage public perception, public policy on behalf of their clients, whoever they might.
At 29 and I find myself wondering what did happen to the last 10. I ran away with my life, fast forward, never turn back again. It's kind of funny that the more we pass time, the more we need to set the rewind. And 19 was the year I had to leave you, but now I'm seeing all the signs. Is this really happening? I can't believe it's true. I'm just as surprised as you. Is this really happening? I can't be too sure, but one day I'll be.
2003. Throngs of Iraqis spontaneously attack a statue of Saddam Hussein, the face obscured with Old Glory. Later, the stars and stripes are replaced with red, white, and black, symbolizing the transference of power from the liberators to the liberated. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld describes the scenes as breathtaking. For the British Army, they are historic. BBC Radio calls them amazing. And they were, because the entire event was staged. Years after the operation.
You guys catch that? And first of all, happy birthday, Rabbit. Rabbit is 29 today. 29. Oh man, happy birthday, Rabbit. I hope it's been great for you. We all love you, and man, you are amazing. Thank you so much for being here and your birthday with us. I feel very, very honored, and it's very special that you're here with us today. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, it's 71 tomorrow. 71 is strong. That's right. Yeah, did you guys catch that? Did you guys know that? You guys remember when the statue came down of Saddam Hussein? You may remember that, at least seeing the optics of that? How many people thought at the time that it was real? You're going to find out right now that it wasn't as real as it seemed.
A U.S. Army report admitted that the toppling of the Saddam statue had been engineered by a psychological operations group. The document states, "Our TPT, or Tactical PSYOP team, saw the statue as a target of opportunity." A week earlier, another psychological operation laid the groundwork for what followed. The script was for a female Rambo turned damsel in distress to be rescued by U.S. armed forces.
In the situation that we're talking about here with Private Lynch, as you know, on about the 23rd of March, her 507th maintenance company was ambushed. A number of the members of that maintenance company were killed, a number were captured, and a number were unaccounted for, she being one of them.
We waited 24 hours to get the cameras there to set up the whole thing to make this a big rescue, and the SWAT team goes in to save her, and then she becomes an instant celebrity overnight. That story happened the same day that the tanks were rolling into Baghdad. That's the same day that we shelled the Palestine hotel where the independent journalists were. The same day we blew up Al Jazeera's television station. And killed one of their journalists. Well, what we're getting on the front pages of the papers and in the news is the rescue of Jessica Lynch. So that was a PR substitute story. Toppling of the Saddam statue They got Shalabi's group. The Renan group had actually formed them. The CIA had paid the Renan group to form the Iraqi Congress as a counter group to Saddam Hussein, and they were based here in the U.S. Then they flew them over there and they shipped them into Iraq. They were the ones that were standing around the statue as, you know, a tank was used to pull it over. The Renan group had been around. He worked for George W.'s father, and he worked for Clinton too. His firm, he used to be a public relations press guy for Carter, and he created a PR firm that specialized in war.
The head of the Rendon Group, John Rendon, denies that he is a national security strategist or a military tactician. Rather, he states, "I am a politician and a person who uses communication to meet public policy or corporate policy objectives. In fact, I am an information warrior and a perception manager." Following the first Gulf War, Rendon was paid $23 million by the CIA to create anti-Saddam propaganda. Following 9/11, he was charged with public relations for the US bombing of Afghanistan. Rendon is far from alone. Public relations has mushroomed into a $200 billion a year industry, with PR flacks in the United States now outnumbering journalists. Propaganda has become the primary means by which the wealthy communicate with the rest of society. Whether selling a product, a political candidate, a law, or a war, seldom do the powerful deliver messages to the public before consulting their colleagues in the public relations industry. Colin Powell presents a now typical case. He didn't choose a seasoned diplomat for the position of Undersecretary of State. Instead, he chose Charlotte Beers, known in PR circles as the Queen of Madison Avenue. Her resume includes successful advertising campaigns for Head & Shoulders dandruff shampoo, Uncle Ben's rice, and now Uncle Sam.
You see a news show, you watch 60 Minutes or a Fox program or whatever it is, you tend to give more credibility to what you're told is journalism. If an advertisement comes on, hopefully you tend to be more skeptical of that because obviously somebody put an awful lot of money into crafting this slick TV ad and airing it. But what you probably never suspect is that that news story you just watched was also crafted by a company given to the TV station or network with the understanding that they would put their own logos on it, identify it as real journalism, and air it.
Colonel Sam Gardner would eventually chart 50 false news stories created and leaked by the Bush White House propaganda apparatus prior to and during the assault on Iraq. Foremost amongst these were the lies that led to the war in the first place. It was not bad intelligence that led to the invasion, concludes Gardner. It was an orchestrated effort that began before the war and was meticulously planned to manipulate the public.
In 2002, when the Bush administration was conducting its massive public relations campaign to sell the war, out of Donald Rumsfeld's office in the Pentagon, there was something now referred to as the Pentagon Pundits Program, where literally scores of former high-ranking military generals and admirals and colonels were getting their talking points for their appearances on TV news shows directly from the Pentagon. They would literally go to the Pentagon, be on phone conferences with the Pentagon, travel with the Pentagon, and then go on TV as supposedly independent sources. Although most of them were actually being paid in the private sector because these are retired military officials by defense contractors, and many of them were actually registered lobbyists for military contractors. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest right away when your bread and butter is based on being able to sell armaments and bombs and missiles, and you're supposed to be just a patriotic ex-general giving an honest opinion of what's going on. And even though that's illegal, there's no way to really stop it. And the most powerful medium through which it occurred refuses to even report on the scandal. You've got just a massive problem, and that's where we're at.
There were clear warning signs long before the age of the embed. During the assault on Serbia under President Clinton, a report emerged by the Dutch journalist Abe de Vries, revealing the presence of Psy warriors working at CNN. They derived from the 3rd Psychological Operations Battalion at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. De Vries quoted Major Thomas Collins of the U.S. Army Information Service. PsyOps personnel, soldiers, and officers have been working in CNN's headquarters in Atlanta through our program. Training with industry. They helped in the production of news. What made the Iraq War different were not so much the tactics or even the scale, but the high-tech synergy. It was
Sorry, when I stopped it last time, I meant to say remember that. I realized I had a different mic on.
almost impossible to tell where the state ended and the Fourth Estate began.
One of the things that we don't want to do is to destroy the infrastructure of Iraq, because in a few days we're going to own that country.
Should they have used more? Should they, use a Moab, the mother of all bombs, and a few daisy cutters? And, let's not just stop at a couple of
Daisy
cruise
cutters?
missiles.
The invasion of
Oh,
Iraq
daisy cutter.
represents a pinnacle of domestic PsyWar in the United States, an unparalleled integration between public relations firms, corporate media, and military PsyOps. At the time of the assault, large segments of the American public were convinced that a nuclear attack by Saddam Hussein on their nation was not only possible, but imminent. Soldiers who comprised the invading force were similarly confused, with a remarkable 77% believing that Hussein was responsible for the attacks of 9/11. Many earnestly believed that the mission was to destroy a mysterious group known as Al-Qaeda, while bringing freedom to the Iraqi people.
We're here for your fucking freedom! So back up right now!
Yet what was actually happening was what the Nuremberg Charter describes as the single greatest crime under international law: the planning, preparation, initiation, or waging of a war of aggression. Seven years later, the results of the invasion are clear. According to The Lancet, one of Britain's most respected medical journals, approximately 600,000 Iraqis had been killed from the invasion as of 2006. By 2009, a polling agency put the number at over 1 million. 4 million Iraqis have been made refugees in their own country. Their entire society is shattered. How did the land of the free and the home of the brave arrive at a place where citizens could be manipulated with such efficiency and on such a massive scale? Our story begins in an unlikely place, a coal mine.
Hey, Memento. Hey, Alpist. How you guys doing? Thanks for being here.
When we think of public relations, this is not an image that springs to mind. Yet it was here, at the turn of the century, in the town of Ludlow, Colorado, that PR as we know it began to take shape. From the beginning, it was steeped in class warfare.
The conditions that men, women, and children worked under in 19th century America were very much like
Hi,
what
Suzanne.
we think of now as the conditions in the global South, in which 13, 14-hour days were not uncommon. Living conditions were often in barrack-like housing. Children worked right alongside their parents. Those were the kind of conditions. And certainly if you picture what we see in the global South today, almost slave-like conditions, you can make the comparison pretty easily.
Like workers in most other industries at the time, the coal miners in the town of Ludlow were organizing to win basic rights. In 1914, the United Mine Workers Union called for coal companies to grant safe working conditions, tolerable wages, and compliance with state mining laws. In response, a labor organizer at Ludlow was shot to death by gunmen working for the Colorado Fuel and Iron Corporation, owned by the Rockefeller family. Then as now, the Rockefellers were synonymous with wealth and power. William Avery Rockefeller had made a living as a literal snake oil salesman, but his son, John Davidson, had achieved the American dream. His fortune was built by exploiting oil reserves in Mexico and the United States. John Davidson Rockefeller was America's first billionaire, but it was his son, John D. Jr., who would define the Rockefeller legacy in the 20th century. 24 hours after striking workers and their families celebrated Easter, the end came. It became known as the Ludlow Massacre.
The strike went on from the fall of 1913 to the spring of 1914, and they still couldn't break the strike. The strikers were living in tent colonies set up by their union, the United Mine Workers. And in April of 1914, the National Guard, which at this time was being paid by the Rockefellers, National Guard, attacked the tent colony. Men, women, children, killed many people, set the tents afire. We found the next day the bodies of 11 children and 2 women who were burned, suffocated to death in that fire. That was called the Ludlow Massacre.
A brief glance at events prior to Ludlow reveals that the brutalization of workers in the United States was not an unusual occurrence. 60 years earlier, in 1847, a nationwide general strike was met with violent oppression by federal troops. Over 30 workers were killed and 100 wounded at the Battle of the Viaduct in Chicago. In 1894, federal troops killed 34 American Railway Union members, also in the Chicago area. The troops were attempting to break a strike led by Eugene Debs against the Pullman Company. In 1897, 19 unarmed coal miners were killed and 36 wounded by a posse organized by a sheriff near Latimer, Pennsylvania. Most of the workers were shot in the back while attempting to flee. The worldview of the great capitalists at the turn of the century can be summed up in the words of William Vanderbilt. In response to a suggestion that the New York Central Railroad should adjust its train schedules to accommodate the public, he replied, "The public be damned." But the relationship between the public and corporations was changing. Decades of organizing and rebellion had given rise to a vast network of labor groups with increasing political power. Over time, these included the Grange Movement, the Socialist Party, the Greenbackers, the Populists, and Progressives, and perhaps most significantly, the anarchist union known as the Industrial Workers of the World, or the Wobblies. Following the massacre at Ludlow, soldiers in Denver refused to participate in further attacks against the miners, declaring that they would not engage in the shooting of women and children. Demonstrations erupted across the country. A march occurred in front of the Rockefeller offices in New York City. A clergyman protested outside a church where Rockefeller liked to give sermons, only to be beaten by police. In modern parlance, it was a PR nightmare.
Ivy Lee went to work for, among other clients, the Rockefellers. The Rockefeller family, after the Ludlow massacre, used Eddie Lee to manage the public perception around that event and other events. Ivy Lee's specialty was crisis management. Among other things, he's credited with inventing the press release, which, all of us just sort of think of as something helpful. You want to publicize an event, a church picnic, call a news conference, you put out a press release. But at the time, the idea was very radical because what Ivy Lee was saying is, well, we're going to manage this crisis by calling attention to it. We're going to actually assist and help the news media and journalists in covering it. What he knew was that the degree to which journalists became used to and dependent on his services was the degree to which he could actually cultivate and manage coverage.
Real quick, in the discussions of propaganda, many times Ivy Lee is left out of the discussion. I tend to bring this up a lot because I want to bring awareness to this, man. It's not that he was the creator of the press release, if you will, and the PR newswire. So like the way that they were able to spread the same story as we see today very quickly, where everybody's repeating the same narrative, that credit goes to Ivy Lee. Just wanted to put that out there so you guys know about that. That's something that we learned in media studies like really early on. But yeah, he's an important figure in all this, and that's why I really like this documentary, man. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. It's really cool, isn't it? They really do bring up a lot of great points. So let's get right back into it.
Lee began by waging a disinformation campaign. He put out news bulletins claiming that the 2 women and 11 children at Ludlow had not been killed by militia, but by an overturned stove. He circulated stories suggesting that Mother Jones, in addition to being a labor organizer, was a madam who ran a bordello. He ghost wrote letters to the governor and even to President Wilson. Lee's techniques achieved little success, in part because he himself had become a highly visible figure. In future, PR experts would learn that their techniques are rarely effective unless practiced in the dark. Yet one of Lee's innovations was epoch-making. Upon learning that the Rockefeller Foundation had $100 million set aside for promotional purposes, he convinced Rockefeller to donate large sums to colleges, hospitals, churches, and charitable organizations in order to generate positive publicity. He also suggested that Rockefeller Sr. begin handing out money in public and that Junior appear in staged photo ops at work sites. What Ivy Lee understood was that the corporation needed a makeover. Widely perceived as greedy, tyrannical institutions, corporations needed to manufacture an image of warmth and caring.
This was the beginning of the public relations industry. Rockefeller didn't set up the Rockefeller Foundation until Rockefeller became very unpopular because of his labor policies. And suddenly Rockefeller needed to create a good impression.
Well, it's an interesting phenomenon that the poor actually give a larger percentage of their income than the rich. I think the rich feel that they're doing more because, giving $100,000 seems like a substantial kind of donation, and it doesn't matter that they have 100 million. They still think, well, they've done quite a lot. So it's partly a result of this distortion of economic values, and it's partly a result of being cheap. People don't want to give away their wealth, Ted Turner said, because they're afraid their status in the Forbes 400 is going to go down that little bit. So they give it away when it's prudent or when it's beneficial, when they can get some displayed benefit out of it, or when it can give them access to a different sort of social class or a different group that they want to be part of. But they have a more functional view of their wealth rather than a strictly charitable view.
Charity and private charity, and you might say government charity. Any kind of action that sort of relieves people's distress a little bit without changing the system maintains the system. In fact, that is the way the American system, which is very exploitative and very unfair, that's the way the American system has been maintained for all these centuries, really, by giving people a little bit and giving enough people, just enough, to prevent them from breaking out in open rebellion.
Today, one of the largest PR firms in the world specializes in the art of crisis management. Burson Marsteller holds offices in 35 countries and has served clients as varied as cigarette maker Philip Morris, chemical giant Union Carbide, and the Monsanto Corporation, a company specializing in genetic engineering and other life sciences. Like the Rendon Group, Burson Marsteller is bipartisan to the core. Its worldwide president and chief executive, Mark Penn, served as Hillary Clinton's key political advisor during the 2008 election. The most disturbing facet of Burson Marsteller is its willingness to work with the world's worst human rights violators. They ran PR for the Indonesian government as it committed genocide in East Timor. They worked
Trigger
closely
warning.
with the
I'm
Nigerian
sorry.
government and Royal Dutch Shell during and after the Biafran War in Nigeria, and they helped to improve the image of a US-backed Argentine military junta led by General Jorge Videla.
One of their clients in the 1970s was the brutal Argentine junta, which had taken control of the government there and was rounding up dissidents, systematically torturing, beating, killing people, and flying out over the ocean and dumping bodies. Not a really good public image. So the Burson Marsteller firm was used by Argentina, hired by Argentina, and went to work for them quite happily under a FAT contract to improve the image of Argentina in the international financial community and in the Western press.
In some ways, it should not be surprising that public relations has evolved into companies like Burson Marsteller and the Rendon Group. Looking back at the career of its first guru, we find a remarkably similar pattern.
Ivy Lee went to work for the IG Farben company, a big German industrial company, and we know now that IG Farben was actually part of the Nazi propaganda inner circle. One of the most effective and, of course, horrifying government propaganda campaigns ever organized was the Nazi campaign that continued for years and years under the direction of Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. And IG Farben paid Ivy Lee and also paid Ivy Lee's son to represent not just their interests, but the interests of Nazi Germany in an effort to paint the Nazi regime as being a friendly regime.
But before lending his expertise to the Third Reich, Mr. Lee would do so for the American government. Along with other experts in the burgeoning field of mind science and public relations, he would engineer propaganda for World War I, not just against the enemy, the Germans, but against the American people themselves.
Thank you, Shitagram. Great. I'm so happy you were here. We'll see you. Thank you for being part of the replay crew too. And hey, to everybody else on the replay crew, we love you. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much
Yes.
for taking the time to watch this after we do it live, man. It really means a lot. You guys don't
Bye,
get shouted out enough. Bye, Shani.
Thanks for coming
Jacob.
by.
Yes, thank you. Isn't Argentina one of the most prosperous South American countries today? Or am I remembering incorrectly? Maybe a connection to be made. Yeah, I mean they definitely have like with the most oil, isn't it right? So
They used to be big in beef and like mining, and then Perón took presidency, and with the unions he ran it all into the ground with his wife Ava. You know that
That's right.
story.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Venezuela has the most oil.
No,
But yeah.
Argentina had huge beef product. They were a huge
okay.
beef distributor, especially for Europe. But that's because England mostly owned them. So,
yep, there you have it.
And they were very fascist. It was a fascist country, and that was their downfall because they all lost the war.
So. Yeah, it might have been because everybody after World War II, all the bad guys went to live there, huh? Maybe.
Yep. They allowed them sanctuary there, Paraguay, Uruguay. So that's where they all went. But they're on the upswing, I think.
I hope so.
Not as much as they would like to be, because I know somebody from there. But they're on the upswing, at least from where they were. But they were a very prosperous, influential country at one point, and then they weren't. So.
Yeah, so maybe we did cover this a little bit today. I think it's a mix of the two, definitely.
Yeah, that's just a brief, synopsis.
We often talk about the propaganda being relatively recent, but of course it isn't. even in ancient societies that weren't democratic, especially large states, it was understood by elites that if you don't have the support of the people, you could be in trouble. And so a fair bit of attention was actually given to legitimizing military adventures. I'm remembering here a passage from an old Chinese text, I think it's Han Fei's, so it would be about 2,300 years ago, where the author of the book says, in general, and I'm quoting now, in general, war is a thing that the people despise. Therefore, when a young man is to be sent off to war, his wife, his parents, his family should gather around him and say to him, conquer, or let me never see you again. And this is a very powerful sense of, well, first of all, the violence done to that young man, but also of the sense that war is disgusting to most people. And it is often not in their best interest. And therefore, one needs all kinds of songs and dances. And in this case, threatening the young man essentially with dispossession. You can't return to your family. You can't return home. You'll be disgraced. Honor, security, everything's being played upon her. And it continues.
In other words, manufacturing your consent, right? Getting your consent through deceptive means.
Well, I would think it must be hard to get a whole nation to like sign up to go to a war they're not going to benefit from, and it's just going to help the upper echelon.
Yep,
like, how do you convince especially as big as we are? Like, it's ridiculous. And what motivates us? Fear and patriotism. That's about it.
So yeah, national security is one of the most powerful notions in modern times to swindle, I think, people to do things that are not in their best interest and to support massive military complexes that are not in anybody's interest, but that are like cancers feeding on society frequently.
Propaganda and persuasion have been around for centuries, eons, but propaganda in its modern sense can be traced to the 15th and 16th century when the Catholic Church was in a tough competition with the Protestants over how to articulate a religious vision for the world. The reason that I mention this is that it shows that propaganda is about mindset. It's about ideology. It's about worldview, how people see things, as distinct from an individual policy or whether you happen to like this candidate or that candidate. So that's where the word came from for propagating the faith. And that's the way the word was used up until the early 20th century. And then what emerged, particularly with World War I, was the application of this propagating the faith to refer to international affairs, to refer to what a national government would do, a national security policy. The run-up to World War I and during World War I, what one saw on the geopolitical stage was a crisis of empires. Empires were disintegrating, they were falling apart. The British Empire seemed extremely strong at that time, and yet nevertheless was in a downward phase. It couldn't afford to support its own army, for example. Same with the French, same with the Austro-Hungarians, same with the Russians, the Tsarist Empire, same with the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and so on around the world. When that war was underway, most particularly the United Kingdom came up with an office whose specific purpose was promoting the war aims of the United Kingdom, the English, through publicity, through covert operations, through what would today be called dirty tricks, through telling the truth, through a whole number of different applications of information, using information as an instrument of war. And from the get-go, from the very beginning, it was both aimed at the enemy and aimed at the home population.
The Creel Commission was the American variant of it. Woodrow Wilson came into office in 1916 with the slogan, "Peace without victory." He said, what we want is an end to World War I. Neither side deserves their support, and the population didn't want to enter the war.
In America, 1916 was an election year. The war was the dominant issue. The election campaigns of the parties crystallized the sway of opinion. Neutralism, the profound wish to stay out of the war, still possessed a doughty champion in the president. Support for Wilson's policy was strong in the Middle West and Pacific states. Europe's war seemed more remote there than on the Atlantic seaboard. At the Democratic Convention, Wilson was renominated presidential candidate. The chairman opened his speech with a text from the Sermon on the Mount.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
Within a couple of months, Wilson was talking about victory without peace. And you had to somehow drive the population into accepting this sharp change of policy, the opposite of what they voted for. And that's where the Creel Commission came in.
George Creel described his work with unabashed enthusiasm. It was a plain publicity proposition, a vast enterprise in salesmanship, the world's greatest adventure in advertising. 75,000 civil leaders, known as 4-Minute Men, were assembled to deliver pro-war messages to people in churches, theaters, and civic groups. Periodicals were sent to 600,000 teachers. Boy Scouts delivered copies of President Wilson's addresses to households across America. It was, in short, the largest wartime propaganda campaign in the history of the United States. Central to the committee's propaganda were two basic ideas. One, the American homeland was in imminent danger from a savage, bloodthirsty foe. And two, it was the fate of the American nation, in President Wilson's words, to make the world safe for democracy. The first theme was a time-honored tactic, long used in the United States and other countries, to vilify foreign enemies, indigenous peoples, and slaves. During the Great War, the savage Indian and the subhuman Negro would transform into the barbaric Hun. The caricature of the bloodthirsty Hun was bolstered by a series of fake news reports leaked by the new propaganda industry and disseminated to the public. Among them, the babies in Belgium had had their hands cut off, were being impaled on bayonets, and in one case, nailed to a door. That a Canadian had been crucified by German soldiers, and that dead bodies were being boiled down in so-called corpse factories to be used for ammunitions and pig food. In a foreshadowing of the Freedom Fries incident, sauerkraut was renamed Liberty Cabbage. False atrocity stories would become a staple for nations in wartime throughout the 20th century. The recent example occurred prior to the First Gulf War.
While I was there, I saw Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns.
Anybody remember this, right? Anybody remember this right here? Well, if you don't, you're getting ready to have a
flashback,
new information. But if you do, you're getting ready to get some new information right here. You're gonna be surprised by
Wow.
this if you haven't heard it yet.
Took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
As it turns out, the massacre of babes never occurred. The young girl was
Jesus.
actually a member of the Kuwaiti royal family and had been coached by the public relations firm Hill and Knowlton to give persuasive false testimony.
kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
The attempt to engender hatred against Germans in support of the war effort was highly successful. But there was another, equally important aspect to the domestic propaganda campaign. If every adventure story needs a villain, it also needs a hero.
Hey, Thomas, welcome.
Now, this is a song I made about when there's a draft in the mill. Uncle Sam say he travel east and travel west. Uncle Sam say he believe he know the best. Uncle Sam said, Uncle Sam said, Uncle Sam said, you got to bottle love and go. I'll travel the east, travel the west.
Creel estimated that 72 million copies of 30 different booklets about American ideals were sent across the United States, with millions more sent abroad. In addition to influencing the minds of Europeans, the goal was to redefine for the home population the very concept of what it meant to be American. The new American would not interpret events from what Creel called a class or sectional standpoint, but rather as a unified collective. In this manner, the people could be herded into one white-hot mass instinct.
Hey, Thomas.
Previously, military action by the United States had been justified under the pretense of maintaining order, protecting American interests, and bringing civilization to the savages. Now, the word civilization would transmute into democracy.
Sam say you don't have to hesitate, Uncle Sam say you got it by love and go. Next number is called 192. Uncle Sam say if you don't come, I'm going to talk.
Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian communications theorist, once said that if a fish could talk and you could ask a fish, what's the most obvious element of your environment? The last thing that the fish would say would be water. That's the last thing the fish would notice. And it's true about any culture. Those things that are most powerful and most obvious to an outsider don't get seen by the people swimming in that water. Americans as God's chosen people. This goes back as far as back to 1630, where John Winthrop on the Arabella, coming from England to the United States, said we're a city on a hill. It's not an accident that in the campaign, debates and stumps of the recent candidates, you had Barack Obama actually saying that we are a city on a hill, as well as Sarah Palin. Ronald Reagan said it in his inaugural address.
I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace.
We're a city on a hill. And so our mission is to democratize the rest of the world. We've got the best system possible. And basically, people ought to pay attention to us because we know.
The idea of a particular state cast as savior of the world would be taken to new heights in the United States. But it wasn't an American invention. The savior motif was used as a justification for virtually every imperial intervention during the colonial era. French leaders spoke of a civilizing mission in their new colonies. British leaders spoke of bringing progress in civilized government to India. Imperial Japan spoke of unleashing an earthly paradise in Asia, while the Third Reich dreamt of a worldwide utopia. A decade before World War I, Mark Twain stated that my kind of loyalty was loyalty to one's country, not to its institutions or its office holders. Decades later, George Orwell came to a similar conclusion, that patriotism is a devotion to a certain place and people, contrary to nationalism, which is inseparable from lust for power. This concept of patriotism remains elusive.
Wow.
Yep. I just want to make a point real quick that these are old school documentaries, right? So there are going to be, back in the day, you know, the documentaries are a lot more in your face about graphic, and you're going to see some of that here and there, but that's just, you know, we're taking a trip back in time here. So I hope that's good with everybody, because, you know, things like that will pop up. We're talking about sensitive subjects. It will happen. I think everybody here is, you know, got that under control. I just wanted to put that out there that, yeah, sometimes you will see some shocking images, and just to, you know, be on guard for that if that's something that is troubling for you. So anyways, here we go.
Imagine living through it.
Right. Exactly. You know, I feel like you gotta take a hard look at life like this.
Yeah.
You know. Mhm.
Well, you do. You have to see this
again-
kind of stuff to understand the gravity of it, because otherwise it's just something that happened. And everybody's like, oh, well, this isn't what they told. No, it's not what they told you, because history is written by the victor, and they can rewrite whatever they did. 2 generations down, nobody's going to know the difference unless we do stuff like this. That's the only way to do it, is to question.
That's right. You can't live in denial.
Nope. But apparently you can get laid on it.
We expect every American to support our military, and if they can't do that, to shut up.
Equating super patriotism with militarism, military endeavor, military achievements, military struggles and victories, that's all supposedly a special manifestation of super patriotism. And I argue that a real patriot wants something different for his country. He wants social justice.
I'm sorry.
He wants peace and stability. He wants fairness. He wants an end to racism and sexism. He takes pride in his country's ability at social betterment, rather than his country's ability to invade and knock around other countries. A real patriot feels an attachment to his country, but not at the expense of other countries. He or she may feel a special attachment to the history of his own country. He values the accomplishments of his country, like the abolition of slavery, emergence of collective bargaining, and the rights of working people for a better life, the gains made by women in terms of being able to get into public
Hell, the
life.
19th.
These are the kind of things that the real patriot would value.
In October 2001, George W. Bush signed into law what civil libertarians characterized as an all-out assault against the Bill of Rights. It was called the Patriot Act. During the Great War, similar bills were passed. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act, passed a year later, authorized huge fines and lengthy prison terms for anyone who obstructed the military draft or encouraged what was termed disloyalty to the state. The sweeping legislation was quickly put into effect. And first on the list were the Wobblies.
In many ways, the Wobblies were the most impressive example of a union movement in the history of the U.S. working class. Wobblies was the nickname for an organization called the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, which flourished in the first decade and a half of the 20th century. The American Federation of Labor, which was the main craft union at the time, refused to organize African Americans, immigrants, and women workers. So that meant excluding the vast majority of the working class from the union movement. Along come the Wobblies, and they set out from the beginning specifically to organize immigrants, women, African Americans alongside white workers in what they called one big union. They led some of the most successful strikes. One of their strikes was the first sit-down strike at the time. Women workers played leadership roles, something that was absolutely unheard of at the time. their philosophy was a revolutionary philosophy. It's known as anarcho-syndicalism.
A federated, decentralized system of free associations incorporating economic as well as social institutions would be what I refer to as anarcho-syndicalism. And it seems to me that it is the appropriate form of social organization for an advanced technological society in which human beings do not have to be forced into the position of tools, of cogs in a machine.
On September 5th, 1917, federal agents raided offices of the Wobblies across the nation, leading to arrests for the offense of causing insubordination, disloyalty, and refusal of duty in the military and naval forces. 101 of the defendants were found guilty and received prison sentences up to 20 years.
Wilson carried out a brutal internal repression called the Red Scare, which is the worst in American history, far worse than McCarthy, far worse than anything that's going on now. They arrested thousands of people, smashed the labor movement, heavy constraints on free expression, threw lots of people in jail, expelled all sorts of people from the country.
Yet what had started as a hunt against radicals soon spread to every corner of American society. Patriots were encouraged to inform on friends and neighbors who spoke out against the war, while surveillance increased dramatically, not only by the military, but by seemingly benign institutions like the postal system.
The state flourishes in time of war. The state goes stronger in time of war. The state accumulates power. The military is enhanced. The forces of repression are enhanced. War is an opportunity for the government to grow in power.
By the time the war ended, the total number of deaths had reached approximately 9.7 million soldiers, with millions more suffering life-changing injuries and severe post-traumatic stress. To what end was not clear. The massive bloodshed had not made the world safe for freedom and democracy. What it had done was produce enormous fortunes for a handful of corporations and banks, while leaving the worldwide labor movement in disarray. If the Great War had been a test of the Constitution and the concept of balancing the powers by each other, it failed. The United States Supreme Court, established in Schenck versus United States and Abrams versus United States, that the federal government could suspend constitutional rights when the nation faced, quote, a clear and present danger. Randolph Bourne, speaking of the Great War as a whole, responded preemptively with a now famous dictum. War, he said, is the health of the state.
The definition of polyarchy that we have in the social sciences is a system where the participation of masses of people is limited to voting among one or another representatives of the elite in periodic elections. And in between elections, the masses are now expected to keep quiet, to go back to life as usual, while the elite make the decisions and run the world until they can choose between one or another elite another 4 years later. So really, polyarchy is a system of elite rule, and a system of elite rule which is a little more softcore than the type of elite rule that we would see under a military dictatorship, for instance. But what we see is that under a polyarchy, the basic socioeconomic system does not change. It does not become democratized. Wealth is not redistributed downward. You don't see a more equitable redistribution of wealth and resources. So that's the key. Socioeconomic dictatorship and free elections. That's the prescription for polyarchy. Participatory democracy would see not only more participation of people in the running of their daily affairs, but it would see a democratization of the economy, democratization of social relations.
In the 20th century, you can't really talk openly about rule by the rich. That doesn't sound nice. The devices that have been developed, propaganda devices, are ruled by the more competent, the technocratic elite, the responsible people, the educated sectors. There's a huge literature on this, but maybe the primary source for the 20th century is the leading public intellectual of the 20th century in the United States, Walter Lippmann, highly respected commentator on public affairs, also a theorist of democracy.
During World War I, people who later emerged as sort of the founding fathers of modern communication research, modern communication applications, mass media applications, quite a number of them had worked as propagandists during World War I, often as relatively young people who were shaping their own ideas at the time. And one of them was Walter Lippmann, and Lippmann has emerged really to this day as a leading intellectual light of a particular way of looking at society.
Today, Walter Lippmann is known as the Dean of American Journalism. Yet during the Great War, he had been chief leaflet writer and editor of a U.S. propaganda unit. He also served as secretary of the Inquiry, a quasi-intelligence agency. Before dealing with Lippmann's contributions to political theory, we first have to understand the forms of democracy that have characterized the United States and other Western nations since the age of the Great Revolutions. A leap forward from the age of monarchy, the new nation-states would nevertheless preserve the concept that wealthy elites had the right to rule over the mass of the population.
Well, it's done me a sight of good coming forward in time like this, to see how wonderful things have turned out. But I wish I could take you back with me, back in time, back those 200 years when we were starting as a nation. I wish you could have seen this country then.
George Washington was a slave owner. James Madison was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. Importantly, Jefferson, who was the most democratic of the lot, wasn't at the Philadelphia Convention. He was ambassador to France, and he picked up a lot of radical ideas from the French Revolution, which didn't exactly endear him to people like Alexander Hamilton. The initial divide in American politics then goes back to those roots. It's Jeffersonian Democrats against Federalists, the leader of whom, until he was killed by Burr, was Alexander Hamilton. Essentially a class struggle, a class conflict. Thomas Jefferson was, in fact, a fairly radical democratic thinker in his time. And clearly the Declaration's statement that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, was a powerful democratic statement. And although Jefferson would not have applied it to women or to Indians or to blacks, nonetheless, in all of those cases, those words would come back to be very serviceable for those groups in pushing civil rights and civil liberties forward in the United States from where Jefferson's statement left them. The problem with the Declaration of Independence was that once independence was won from Britain, then the question became one of governance. How were these former colonies of Britain to govern? What led immediately to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 were a series of uprisings by debtors, essentially, not just in Massachusetts. The most famous is, of course, the Shays Rebellion in 1786.
The American state was founded largely to get the Ohio Valley, largely to cross the Appalachians. That is the Constitution, to organize an army and money in order to conquer further lands more to the west. That's the origin of the USA. But to do that, the slave masters are not going to do the fighting. What they will do is hire poor people to do it. But when they don't pay the poor people, as they didn't pay Daniel Shays takes matters into his own hand in 1787 and goes to the courts and shuts down the courts because the courts were beginning to foreclose on the grounds that Daniel Shays and the other veterans from the American War of Independence did not have the money to pay back.
Debtor riots were happening throughout the 1780s. And they were sufficiently scary from the point of view of people with property that they had to do something about it. And what they did about it was essentially overthrow the Articles of Confederation and instill a much stronger, much more able government to protect the property interests that were in dire threat from the people, quote unquote. This was an elitist, you could almost say coup d'etat, except there wasn't any strong central government to launch a coup against. They were really trying to set one up and protect it against majoritarian interests, especially economic interests, especially property interests, especially threats from people who didn't have much. First thing they did when they got to Philadelphia in 1787 was they locked the doors. The only reason we know what happened behind those closed doors were that people like James Madison kept extensive notes.
The American Constitution was formulated primarily by James Madison. He's the major framer of the Constitution, and he wanted to overcome what he called the tyranny of the majority. He said a primary goal of government is to ensure that the opulent are protected from the majority. So therefore, he designed the Constitution in such a way that, as he put it, the wealth of the nation will be in charge. The more responsible set of men, those who sympathize with property owners and their rights. And the system was designed that way. Power was in the Senate, which was the least representative body, and it was the wealth of the nation. In fact, it still is. The House of Representatives, which is more democratic, in theory, was given much less power. And the powerful executive is also supposed to represent the wealth of the nation. In Madison's defense, one should say that he was really pre-capitalist in his mentality. He assumed that the wealthy would be what he called benevolent gentlemen who would not be concerned with their own interests, but with the benefit of the people. Adam Smith, who preceded him, was much more realistic. He pointed out that the principal architects of policy, namely the merchants and manufacturers in his day, they ensure that the policies are designed so that their own interests are protected, no matter how grievous the effect on others, including the people of England. It's rather interesting to compare Madison's thinking, which founded this country, with the first major book on politics, namely Aristotle's Politics. Aristotle surveyed many kinds of systems and decided that of all of them, didn't like any of them, but he said of all of them, democracy is probably the best. But he said that democracy has a problem. And it was the same problem that Madison noticed centuries later. He said if in Athens everyone had a right to vote, the poor majority would attack the property of the rich, insist that it be divided, and he also felt that was unfair. But Madison and Aristotle had opposite solutions. Madison's solution was to restrict democracy. Aristotle's solution was to restrict inequality.
Opponents of the new government were called anti-federalists, though the term is inaccurate. The majority favored some form of federation, but insisted on more localized control, with a more participatory democratic system.
The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, they were the price the Federalists had to pay in the ratifying conventions to pass the document. So the democratic element of the Constitution, which of course is the Bill of Rights, was forced down their throats. It didn't come out of Philadelphia at all. It was appended in 1791 and forced down on the Constitution by the more democratic elements in the society. Even with the Bill of Rights, we have a system which, is hardly perfect from the point of view of civil rights and civil liberties. Let's put it mildly. It trampled all over with the rights of citizens. So the Bill of Rights is hardly an ironclad set of guarantees for civil rights and civil liberties in the United States. I hate to think of the United States without it. The anti-federalists were significantly more partial to democratic elements in the society and to the rights of ordinary people. than were the significantly more elitist Federalists.
If the greatest legacy of the Anti-Federalists was the Bill of Rights, their dream of direct democracy was not to be. At the time, many dissidents made predictions for what they believed would come to pass as the new nation grew and flourished. The natural course of power is to make the many slaves to the few, one Anti-Federalist wrote. Another objected to the new government because the bulk of the people can have nothing to say to it. The government is not a government of the people. The men of fortune would not feel for the common people. An aristocratical tyranny would arise, in which the great will struggle for power, honor, and wealth. The poor become a prey to avarice, insolence, and oppression. In short, my fellow citizens, it can be said to be nothing less than a nasty stride to universal empire. A significant model for both the Federalists and Anti-Federalists were the Iroquois, who had created a highly sophisticated and democratic federation of self-governing units. In stark contrast to European forms of government, the Iroquois people had the ability to immediately remove corrupt leaders. Women played a significant role in decision-making. Everyone was permitted to participate in debate and policy formulation.
Native Americans were exceedingly democratic in the way they operated. No society is perfect. When you make comparisons, you see that. They were sometimes small, but sometimes 30, 40,000 people and more in a large confederacy that operated on a basis of mutual respect. Mutual respect that developed out of experience, because if you didn't treat people equally, then they were going to give you trouble. Societies were exceedingly collaborative, but they were also exceedingly individualist. The individual was honored, but the values were collaborative because you had to get along. Everybody was included in every decision that affected. Elders obviously were honored. They knew more. You listened to your elders, but everybody had a say. You have an extremely participatory society, and as it moved up to larger, there's a great deal of decentralization. So if you had a large number of people, and they would be in a federation, the village would decide for itself. The tribe would then decide, but the individual villages would have to decide. Then the tribes in the federation, their representatives would meet. But they wouldn't decide for everyone. They'd have to have the consensus of local people. So if there wasn't consensus already, they would have to go back and discuss it. So that to the extent that there was representation, these were representatives who were truly representative. They would have to go back. They wouldn't keep their positions unless they consulted people. And they knew that. Even if they had the authority to make a decision, people would go elsewhere and not keep them as leaders if they didn't listen to them and they didn't treat them. By and large, you had a much more participatory society, and even on the larger, more representative level, the representatives really had to listen to their constituencies.
I guess. I mean, I think there's always some variation in that. And again, I don't necessarily saying this is 100%. I think the points are there to be made. I think people then have their opinions about things. I like to do a deep dive on this. I've heard some conflicting stories in this realm that was the setup, but it wasn't necessarily as utopic as and perfect as this man seems to be describing it. I could be wrong, but I'm just putting that out there as a caveat.
There's got to be some types of infighting. I mean, there always is.
Yeah, I don't know that it was completely as precise as he was describing it, but I wasn't there, and neither was he. So,
yeah.
Ironically referred to as primitive and savage, Native Americans had actually created a far more democratic system of self-governance than any civilized nation in history. But their anarchic models, as well as the more limited democratic systems proposed by the Anti-Federalists, were incompatible with Madison's elitist vision. In republic and parliamentary democracy alike, citizens would be reduced to passive observers. They would be allowed to pick and choose which individual made decisions on their behalf, but they would not be able to make those decisions themselves. Returning to the period after the First World War, we find widespread support amongst intellectuals for Madison's elitist interpretation of democracy. According to Walter Lippmann, the public's function in politics was to be interested spectators of action, but not participants.
Again, I think we're getting in perspective here a little bit. And I think that the representative democracy we have is there for a reason. And there may be some difference of opinion here. This is kind of like a center left kind of a documentary, but the facts about propaganda and the stuff that we've been hearing throughout are accurate. And then of course, people are going to have their opinions about how they interpret these type of events here, just to kind of caveat that as well.
Yet Lippmann perceived a problem. New technologies in communication and transportation had awakened millions of disenfranchised people to a new world outside their towns and cities, while traditional economic, political, and social structures remained in place. Something had to change. But rather than advocate structural changes in society's institutions, Lippmann suggested that propaganda readjust the public mind.
In his essays on democracy in the 1920s, which are incidentally called progressive essays on democracy, he was a Wilson, Roosevelt, Kennedy.
And as far as Chomsky goes, I've said this before. Manufactured consent was the primary focus of my some of my earlier studies in life, and it did teach me a lot. Now, while I don't agree politically with Chomsky, I think as a linguist and a media analyst, he's always been one of the best. He speaks truth. He just has his own perception about how things would work, right? And I think Thomas Sowell does a great job of kind of debunking his political positions and a lot of other positions, but I always have hold him in high esteem in terms of media analysis and linguistics, and I don't think there's any denying that in those areas he's usually dead spot on. But again, as I read some of his political books and so on, he's honest, but I don't like some of his takes, straight up.
Liberal in the American sense. He says that the majority are simply incompetent. They are ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, in his view. That's the majority of the population. And to allow them to participate in decision-making would be a complete disaster. So therefore, we have to design means to ensure that what he called the responsible men, of whom he was, of course, one, are protected from the roar and the trampling of the beasts, the ignorant majority. And he devised a number of methods. Lippmann called it the manufacture of consent. We have to manufacture the consent of the ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, mass of the population. And the huge public relations industry was developed at the same time. They are the people who manage and control the marketing exercises that are called elections in the United States. They are marketing exercises, and they're well aware of it.
Apparently we have all been wrong. It is pronounced California. Ladies and gentlemen, the governor of the great state of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
So, for example, in the last election, 2008, the advertising industry gives a prize every year for the best marketing campaign of the year. 2008, they gave it to the Obama campaign, who beat out commercial competitors. The idea is we market candidates the same way we market toothpaste or lifestyle drugs or automobiles. Of course, it helps to have a lot of money. And in fact, Obama greatly outspent McCain, and not because of popular contributions, came mostly from financial industries. He was their candidate. And his policies will presumably respond to his constituency.
Prominent intellectuals continue to argue that the world's complexity makes democracy impossible. A recent cover story in Time magazine claimed that democracy is in the worst interest of national goals. The modern world is too complex to allow the man or woman in the street to interfere in its management. A man who surely would have agreed was Edward Bernays. Like Lippmann, Bernays served as a propagandist on the Creole Committee, and like Lippmann, he went on to refashion wartime propaganda for peacetime aims.
There's Kaiwan Calendar. He needs to be here. He or she.
In his classic text Propaganda, Bernays suggested that elites regiment the public mind every bit as much as an army regiments their bodies. Bernays considered mass mind control so crucial that it constituted, in his words, the very essence of the democratic process. Bernays' opportunity to shine arose when a crisis threatened not only the profits of major corporations, but the entire capitalist system. The solution, as theorized by business leaders, would lead to social breakdown, environmental catastrophe, and further alienation between the American people and their government. It would also lead to wealth on a scale never before imagined.
Hey, real quick, I wanted to say, you know what? Kudzu would be a good idea because that stuff's growing everywhere, man. It's like nonstop, and it's some tough stuff, man. It never quits. It's like if we could find a good use for kudzu, we'd be in good. If you guys get out there and make a good use for kudzu and start a business, man, because it's everywhere and it's free.
What the hell is kudzu?
It's that vine stuff that grows everywhere, man. It's like it's this invasive vine. It's relentless. It crawls around and spools around and then hardens and grows and spreads out more. And you can literally see the vine moving if you watch it closely enough. You see it actually moving. It's nasty stuff, dude. Kudzu makes good syrup, really? Dude, you have to come on and talk about that. I got plenty of kudzu for you. I can hook you up with some kudzu.
I don't even know if we have that here. We have
Ivy.
ivy.
You're lucky. You could actually eat kudzu. This is news to me. I'm learning something today. That's wild. I did not know
try
that.
Please. I enjoy you.
I guess save some money on groceries.
And life.
Right. There you go.
Eat the wrong thing.
The major story that advertising tells us about human happiness is that the way through happiness is through the consumption of things.
I bet.
That, in fact, buying something in the marketplace will make you happy. In fact, that's the message of almost every single ad. And it's not often you can say that there's one message that is in the literally millions of ads that are produced every year. But I think that is the message. The message of advertising as a whole is that it's better to buy than not to buy. That, in fact, the way to become, and then you'll be happier as a result of buying than not buying. And I think that idea, in fact, I think is the major force for global social change, over the last 50 years.
I will say I am going to do a food stream. We do have to cover the food industry, food and health industry, but probably the food industry. I really want to get into what GMOs are, and I just the health of our food and what we put in our body. Like how healthy is it? And what are they trying to steer us into? So we're going to do a big food one. Don't worry about that. In fact, we got a documentary we can, I can think if I could find it, I can't remember the name of it, but if I find it, it's very eye-opening about all that stuff. We can springboard off that into food discussions. I really want to have food discussions with you guys.
In the 1920s, business leaders were faced with a dilemma.
Awesome, Susie.
Overproduction of goods had exceeded demand. Production between 1860 and 1920 had increased by 12 to 14 times, while the population only increased by a factor of 3. There were several ways of solving the problem. One was to reduce working hours and raise wages so that production and consumption reached an equilibrium.
I won't, I promise.
This would have led to more leisure time for workers and a higher standard of living. The problem with this solution is that it could have entailed a slight decrease in profits. Corporations are mandated by law to maximize profits on behalf of their shareholders, regardless of social or environmental costs. According to business leaders, there was another problem. John Edgerton, president of the National Association of Manufacturers, warned that a shorter work week would undermine the work ethic and potentially foment radicalism. If people had time to stop and think, they might also take the time to rethink their position in life. The emphasis should be put on work, Edgerton stated. More work and better work, instead of upon leisure. It seems a harmless enough statement, but what businessmen were advocating was revolutionary. Production would no longer be about satisfying human needs. It would be an end in and of itself. Rather than a democracy of ideas, or a democracy of mass participation, the United States would become a democracy of material goods. The citizen would be replaced by the consumer.
Look at those goods piled up over there. I'm worried. Here we are. We've got the new machines, and they're doing even better than we expected. They've not only cut production costs, but they've increased output over 50%. But we're not selling this additional product. Inventories are piling up. Now, what are we going to do about it?
It seems to me we've got to change our plan completely. Now that we're increasing production, we've got to put on more pressure, work the territory more intensively.
You mean more advertising?
Yes.
The problem of capitalism is the problem of consumption. And the problem is that after your basic needs have been met, there is no real need for consumption. And so you have to convince people that, in fact, their identities are based upon the consumption of objects for which there is no material need. That's the problem that comes from the expansion of the market. If you look at advertising, it's a very interesting history. In the first period of advertising, we can say right up until about the 1920s, advertising talked about goods themselves. They talked about how they were made, what they did, how well they lasted, etc. It really is a discourse about objects, about what goods did. However, starting around 1920, that changes. And from that period on, advertising doesn't really talk about goods themselves. They talk about the relationship of goods to our needs.
At the center of the new strategy was Edward Bernays. If Walter Lippmann had concerned himself with an overarching analysis of mass media and democracy, Bernays would devote most of his energies to propaganda on behalf of the corporation. His uncle, Sigmund Freud, would serve as his muse. Rather than focus on the intrinsic worth of a particular product, Bernays suggested a strategy where products became linked with the unconscious desires of the public. In this manner, there would be virtually no limits to either production or consumption.
Freud's nephew was a man by the name of Bernays, and he's regarded as the father of modern public relations, particularly in the United States. His contribution, if you want to call it that, was to take propaganda techniques that had been developed for military, psychological warfare, national security type issues during World War I, and apply them in a systematic way to commercial issues. One of his best known efforts had to do with encouraging women to smoke. He would stage beauty pageants, he would stage what would today be called photo ops and that sort of thing, in which smoking by women was portrayed as women's liberation, was portrayed as a way to be free and empowered, is getting addicted to nicotine. The audience, the market, in Bernays's mind, had a clear desire to be free, to be stronger, to be more self-empowered. So women clearly wanted these things. Along comes Bernays in the tobacco industry and says, here is how to have it.
Goods don't make us very happy. Goods are not central to satisfaction. What actually really makes people happy are non-material things. What makes people happy seems to be things connected with sociability. I don't mean to say by that material things have nothing to do with happiness. Poor people are not happy. They don't have access to clean drinking water. They don't have access to food. They don't have access to shelter. So it's not that material things are not connected to happiness. They are to some degree. But once you get past a certain level of comfort, material things simply don't provide us happiness. At the same time, there is this giant propaganda system of advertising that is, again, perpetually telling us that the way to happiness is through objects, the way to happiness is through consumption. What makes people happy are things to do with society, with connection, with personal connection, with autonomy, with relaxation. In fact, when you ask people what it is that makes them happy, goods very rarely come into it. However, the problem is that capitalism has to sell goods. The marketplace provides goods, and therefore, what it did was it took the images of the life that people really want, which is a life of meaning, of connection, of sociability, of friendship, of family, of intimacy, of sexuality. Those are the images that it took, and it linked them to objects. And so advertising is both true and false at the same time. If it was simply false, it wouldn't work. But advertising is true to the extent that it reflects our real desires.
As bizarre as it may sound for people who dream of fantastic wealth as a cure for unhappiness, the same holds for the wealthy. Beyond a certain level of material comfort, deprivation is relative.
At the bottom level, sure, it's $5 million to $10 million a year. But once you've got 5 or 10 million, that doesn't seem like enough because you're associating with people who have 15 or 20. And when you get 15 or 20, then it's 50 and 100. And you wind up never feeling as if you have enough. And in fact, people really never even thought of themselves as rich, even when they were colossally rich, because of this phenomenon that psychologists call relative deprivation. They were comparing themselves not with you and me, but with each other in this little world that they'd come to inhabit.
In his book, The Status Seekers, Vance Packard uses the phrase merchants of discontent to describe a deliberate strategy by advertisers of targeting the less affluent with status symbol messages. For someone with little chance of changing their social conditions in life, consumerism offers a quick fix that allows people to feel as though they are climbing the social hierarchy, when in fact, they are standing still. The strategy was particularly evident in mid-century automobile advertising. Studies found that people who lived in housing developments were more likely to park their cars outside of the garage than those who could afford more expensive homes. A typical example is this advertisement from Plymouth. It reads, "We're not wealthy, we just look it." The American way of life would be characterized by a myth which would seem to make political activism unnecessary. In the new democracy of material goods, there were an infinite number of possessions to be purchased by rich and poor alike. There was no need to change institutions because the system was already perfect. It was called the American Dream, and happiness was just one possession away.
Are young adults, and the shopping centers are built in their image. Selling to young adults demands a new kind of marketing. For these young adults, the shopping centers have built fountains, commissioned statues, put in restaurants, and freestanding stairways. They've included banks, loan offices, rental plans, plant nurseries, and places to buy building materials. The shopping centers see these young adults as people whose homes are always in need of expansion. People who buy in large quantities and truck it away in their cars. It's a big market.
In the tinsel and glitter world of Beverly Hills, superstars reign supreme
I used to
in
love this
million-dollar
show.
mansions that hold a weird fascination for everyone else.
Lifestyles and rich and famous.
Yeah, they were hysterical, the things these people spend money on.
But for one man already on the ladder to superstardom, just a look wasn't enough. For him, it was love at first sight.
It's obscene how much money they have.
we just had, at the time of this filming, it was just a few days ago, there was an incident at a Walmart in Long Island the day after Thanksgiving, where basically people were lining up for a sale, 5 a.m, and one of the workers there was crushed to death, was actually trampled to death by these shoppers. And when the ambulance arrived or whatever it was to take the poor guy to the morgue or the hospital or wherever they're going to take, they didn't want to get out of the way. They said, we've been waiting here for 5 a.m. I'm not leaving. So that would be the consumer society at its finest. And oddly enough, exactly to the day 5 years ago, on that day, day after Thanksgiving, the same thing happened at a Walmart in Orlando. It was not a worker, it was a woman who was shopping there. And she wasn't killed, but she was trampled unconscious, and people wouldn't get out of the way for the medics to take her away. So when you get finally to that point, this is what Marcuse was talking about, and the whole idea of one-dimensional man and so on, was this tremendous emptiness again. And so I'm going to buy things to fill that emptiness up. And then we see the religious power of it, because if the medics arrive basically to take the corpse away or the body of the hospital, and you're not going to get out of the way because you're going to save $50 on a DVD player, that suggests something has gone fundamentally wrong.
Everybody's looking restless. Oh, that's an 8-minute countdown. What is going on?
I think there's not much difference between assuaging your anxiety by buying things and investing in the American dream. They seem to go hand in hand.
The American dream is a story about how society works. The American dream says that if you work hard, you will succeed.
You know, the bedrock of our economic success is the American dream. It's a dream shared in big cities and small towns across races, regions, and religions, that if you work hard, you can support a family. That if you get sick, there will be health care that you can afford. That you can retire. That you can retire with the dignity and security and respect that you've earned. That your children can get a good education and young people can go to college even if they don't come from a wealthy family.
And so he says we may start off at different positions. There are people who are rich and there are people who are poor, and they're born into different kind of contexts, but the playing field is level. That's the dream. That's the dream of, you know, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. The problem with that is actually at odds with how social mobility works. Social mobility actually is much more based upon class and upon the resources that you have available to you into which you're born.
Hi, I'm Paris Hilton, and you're here for the fit on MySpace. Let's go check out my shoe closet first. So welcome to my shoe closet. As you can tell, I really love shoes.
Part of those are material resources, and part of those are also cultural resources as well. There are class structures that keep people mostly in their places. There are some slight exceptions to this where there's movement between, you know, one rung and another, but the level of social mobility is remarkably low in the society. And then the American dream is punctuated by these very visible examples in the media that show us people who are poor who are now rich. And now the question is, if those people are rich, if those people have made it, and a vast majority of the people have not, and the major thing that separates them is their own hard work, then the reason that the vast majority of people are where they are is because that is where they deserve to be. You didn't work hard enough. You're not intelligent enough.
The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Some are smart, some not. Some are successful, some not.
The United States never had mass prosperity throughout its history. There was just a period from 1946 to 1980 where the prosperity was really, it looked like it was just going better and better and better for everybody. And that came after World War II, with the backlog of tremendous earnings from war industry and such. The GI Bill that came in that developed a whole new big professional class and the like. And that lasted till about 1980. Since then, there have been cutbacks to human services, cutbacks in educational opportunities, and greater inequality. Since 2000 to 2008, the inequality between the very rich and the rest of us, that inequality is greater than it's been throughout the 20th century. So we're back to like 1900 in terms of inequality. Everybody just can't make it. Throughout history, the rich have always argued that the poor are the authors of their own poverty. They're poor because they're stupid, they're disreputable, they're hopeless. People are poor because they are paid less than the value that they produce. You need poverty. Poverty is needed if you're going to have wealth. The only way a rich slaveholder, a Roman senator, or antebellum plantation owner in the South, the only way they can live in this fabulously luxurious mode is by having slaves who work from the crack of dawn down into the night. That's expropriation. That's creating the poverty of the slave or the serf or the worker so that the slaveholder or the lord, the feudal lord, or the plutocrat, the capitalist, can really accumulate
Thank you for the
wealth.
gift of memberships, T3.
You're welcome. Probably half of those are from Jersey.
The idea that human
doubt it.
happiness is connected to the immense accumulation of commodities. I think that idea is what is driving development in what we used to call the developed world, is driving development in China, is driving development in India. I think it will increasingly drive development in Africa as well. I think we're starting to see the results of what that means for the planet, when not only the 5% of the American population strives for that, but when increasingly the rest of the world also is bought into that, and you then have to provide the goods and the energy that those goods takes to produce, we're arriving at the kind of exhaustion of the physical planet. The ancient philosopher Confucius, he was asked what he would do if he were ever to rule the state. Someone said, okay, you're in charge of the state, what would you do? And he said a very interesting thing. He said he would, quote, rectify the language. And I think if he was asked that in modern age, he would say, let me control the media. If you can control the stories, you don't need to have soldiers on street corners to control them. You can control people in their own heads, in their own imaginations. On one hand, it's really depressing because it's like, how do you then get out of it? Because there's no way you can have control of the media. There's no way you can compete with these stories that are told thousands of times a day through advertising, through programming, through newspapers, through the internet now, through video games, through all kinds of ways. At the same time, the reason I'm hopeful, the reason actually gives me some optimism is that capitalism has to do that. That unless it does that, they know that things will fall apart. So capitalism in that sense is like a house of cards. A house of cards that has to be constantly held together. We have to be told every single day what this story is. And they have to do it every day because it's unnatural. If it was natural, they wouldn't have to do it. And if they stop, they know that in fact it would fall apart. That actually is the great hope for me. Is in fact the amount of time they have to spend convincing us about the value of this society is in fact what gives me hope that that there's an alternative just below the surface, and that alternative is much more human, much more compassionate, is much more connected to concern for other people, is much more connected to concern for the planet, and that it's being held down by this incredible and relentless propaganda system.
Hey, Scott.
If a decision is made
Scott,
by a
what's up,
centralized
man?
authority, it's going to represent the interests of a particular group in power. If power is actually rooted in large parts of the population, if people can actually participate in social planning, then they will presumably do so in terms of their own interests. So that's why Madison, for example, and Bernays and a whole host of others, have argued that we cannot permit the population to participate, because if they do, they will pursue their own interests, not the interests of the wealth of the nation. If you have centralized power, they'll use it for their own interests. You don't have to read that in a complicated textbook. It should be it's understandable by any 10-year-old child, not by educated people, though they have it driven out of their heads. Various illusions replacing self-serving illusions. If the population are participants, they'll serve their own interests. Public opinion is very well studied. So we have a wealth of information about what the public wants. And there's a huge disconnect between public opinion and public policy. The public and policymakers differ enormously on crucial issues. It's all very natural. It's nothing surprising about it, and people understand it. So about 80% of the population in the United States says that the government is run by a few big interests looking out for themselves.
What do you mean by democracy? If you mean by democracy a system that accepts that the relative distribution of power and influence and wealth and income in the society is sacrosanct. If the social system we call and know as capitalism is inviolable, and you can't, in fact, erode or undercut the primacy of that class's power and property politically, then you've just ruled out democracy. The founders had a very clear idea that in order for political power to be democratic and to be equal, economic power also had to be democratic and equal. Okay, and that was the last thing they wanted. So they saw clearly that behind political democracy was economic democracy. Behind political equality was economic equality. And they did everything they could to block it.
The claims of mind control are based on a belief that human beings are powerless or relatively powerless when they become the targets of psychological operations and propaganda. Media control, yeah, it has an impact on public opinion, without a doubt. It has an impact on the assumptions that people bring to trying to figure out what to do with their lives. It's powerful, but it's not the same as mind control. I think the best way to stop propaganda is for people to understand what it is and how it works. I don't think we're going to stop propaganda so long as we have freedom of speech. And frankly, I think that's a good thing for us. But there will always be people who exploit freedom of speech for their own ends. But propaganda loses its effectiveness if people understand what is going on. A very important thing that can be done to reduce the power of propaganda is to force the players to the surface, so that where you have campaigns, political campaigns, product campaigns, cultural campaigns that are organized by big propaganda agencies, public relations agencies, then part of the task for people who are observing this going on is to make this public, make it understood that what's appearing on the front page of the Washington Post, for example, really is a propaganda or public relations campaign that's coming from a particular faction of society who are paying for it, and that they have names.
It depends on what people believe, what people perceive, what people know. And for a democracy to really function and thrive, unlike Eddie Bernays, I would say what we need is more information, more freedom, more transparency, and more information about who's manipulating public opinion and the public mind. Eddie Bernays believed that fundamentally people were unable to govern themselves in a democracy because most of us were just too dumb to figure it out. And so he used that to justify his practice that he exalted of managing and manipulating public opinion. I think actually what we need is a lot more exposure and education about how public opinion is managed and manipulated, so that we have a citizenry that can actually function and be critical thinkers and decision makers and govern ourselves in a democracy. Clearly, individual and public opinion is crucial to everything. As long as you can manage and manipulate public opinion, or as Burson Marsteller likes to put it, public perception, you can control public behavior and policy. That's what Eddie Bernays knew. That's what he was saying when he talked about engineering consent. And so, yeah, I believe that the ultimate battlefield really is in the mind.
I put a spell on you.
All right, guys. How about that? Let's see what y'all thought. What do you guys think of that, huh?
Crap. Wow, that was... I mean, it was a lot of stuff that I knew on the surface, but I didn't know the details of.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how far back corruption went, but that it started, you know, at a certain point with the propaganda. I didn't think it started. I want to say so recently, because to me, like 100 years appears recent, because I knew people that were alive then. You know, like prior to 1900, I think of that as like the ancient times for us as a country. But that was... I did like one of the things that the guy said, and it reminded me of, you know, Your Unveiling Reality, where he said solutions replace illusions. And I think that's what we have to focus more on. I think you're right. Showing people what's actually going on behind all those curtains, and who's really pulling the strings, and, you know, what their rights are, what their actions are, what they could do, you know, to get involved locally, to start small and take steps outward from their community. It's just so much manipulation. And I know I've fallen for it time and time again. It makes you ashamed, like, that your own country would do this to you. Like I was saying, like, when we're attacked, our first instinct is somebody protect us. Who's the biggest force out there to protect us? Our government, our military. We expect it. We want it. We beg for it. And then we give them powers, or we allow them to take powers. Not that we have much say in it. And they never give them back. Why is the Patriot Act still going? Because they're still, you know, perpetuating this whole, oh, we're under attack from terrorists all time. You know, and they pull on that 9/11 heartstring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have a yearly, you know, reminder of it, because it was such a big deal. They make sure it's a big deal, and they make sure it's always prevalent in everybody's head, like it happened yesterday, when it didn't. It happened friggin' 22 years ago. In 22 years, so much has changed, and yet that narrative for that still stays the same. We're learning the truth, but they're still singing the same song. They're just changing some of the lyrics for places they want to go to next. It's just hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a real reaction. Is what it's all about, right there. Yeah, and it is a shame that you can't trust it. And again, this is why I used to recommend this. Now, I know there's not everything in there I necessarily agree with, but the history lesson in it is solid,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the thought process is solid. And you can see even people on the other side had the same feelings about these things, right? Because manipulation and coercion and is lying to people. That's abuse. You know, when you're lying to people in order to get your way, that's abuse. It's just part of the cycle of abuse. And this is the mechanism. It's the mechanism for doing that. And now we see why it's so important to them up there that they had these mechanisms in place, and they continually fund it, and they continually protect it, and they continually let it perpetuate itself, right? The cycle of abuse leads to the cycle of control. And that's exactly what this films like this kind of point out. And it's eye-opening as America, Freedom to Fascism, which we covered last week, but in a different way, right? So you're starting to see how the pieces are connecting here that leads to, like, 10 years, 15 years down the road, stuff show like unveiling reality, right? When I was back in the day, consuming this content, spreading this content, like I said, I've seen this film many times, and it was great to see it again. But guys can kind of see where I come from now, right? And where a lot of my ideas came from, and how I've taken those ideas over the years and refined them, and continually vetted them, and continually readdressed them, right? And they still hold very true today. Yeah. Thank you, sir. There you go. Scott, free freedom. Hey, I had a great time on the stream the other night with you, dude. You're awesome, man. You're awesome.
What kills me is the internet. The internet gave us so much more visibility into what they were doing. And I don't think it really occurred to them that these little voices on this like strange little thing were ever going to like get together and create a bigger voice. I don't think they thought anybody would see through them. And if they did, oh, you're just some crackpot, we'll just shadow ban you. We'll do this. We'll do that. Because they're always hitting back. But I don't think they realized how big of a voice we could have. I mean, we've stood up substantially more than we were even 2 years ago. I mean, so many people were like, that's it. Like that was the straw that broke the camel's back, getting locked inside with people that they love but don't like. That will drive you to see other things. You get invested in other things. You start questioning, why are we doing this again? Like, they said that, but where's the data? Like, all I see are numbers on a screen. I see rolling numbers on a screen. How do you even run a death tally? The fact that I'm looking back thinking, oh my God, I used to sit there for hours just watching numbers. And those were people, they were saying we're dying. And it totally did not affect me except to make me fearful I would be one of those numbers. And I was so desensitized to the amount of death that was being, basically spoon fed to me. And it was mostly lies. Like everything was this one cause, but it wasn't. And it took a lot of digging for me to, find out about that. And, a lot of digging to find out, why are they pushing this, this jab? Like, why are they doing that? But unfortunately, that one, I didn't look enough into that one. But, they make you do things even when you don't want to. I didn't want the jab, but I needed my job. So
yeah, and unfortunately that happened to someone that meant a lot to me, and I believe, I don't know, you never can tell, but recently passed away. But anyways,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you were there. I did the tribute.
I know.
But hey, let's go to the next part of the show here. What is this still going on today? I think we all know the answer. But what about Operation Mockingbird? Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the nitty-gritty of this, but I want to just play this quick new relevant content from Tucker Carlson, kind of calling it out and telling us who some of the players are on this. So check this out, guys. If you haven't seen this, this is going to blow you away. Here we go.
Awesome.
We cannot conduct covert operations. If a committee puts out a report which refers to an activity which leaves out the name of a country or individual concerned, but gives enough evidence for any amateur sleuth to identify it beyond a shadow of a doubt in times for its identification to be carried with the news stories of the report itself.
That is the... All right, but you believe you're consistent with the statutes, but there isn't any statute that prohibits your interception of domestic communications. I believe that's correct.
Yo, what's up, guys? It's your boy, Benny. So we like to separate fact from fiction on this show. However, it is becoming really hard these days because the conspiracy theorists are really rolling up the scoreboard, running up the numbers against the people who like to stick to the official narratives. And who creates those official narratives? Well, our intel agencies, says Tucker Carlson, in confirmation that Operation Mockingbird is still going. Well, what is Operation Mockingbird? Operation Mockingbird is the CIA planting agents or assets inside of news companies in order to push propaganda on the American people. Propaganda like Hunter Biden's laptops, Russian disinformation. Propaganda like Russia stole the 2016 election. Propaganda like stay home, stay safe. Yes, these people want to control your lives, and they use the media and journalists and the corporate press in order to do that. And they have for your entire lifetime and my entire lifetime. Tucker Carlson, who's worked at these corporate media outlets, says so in an interview that just dropped.
Take on a Wolf Blitzer type, because whenever I
take a close look at his history. Actually,
I'm always like, why would he do this? Why would he say a bunch of stuff he doesn't believe or he must know is untrue? Like, what? He sat there as this sort of elder statesman of news and just sort of lied right through COVID and many other subjects. Why would he do that? Why would he do it to his legacy?
I worked with Wolf for years, never had a problem with him. It's always nice. No one wants to hear it, and I'm sure most people won't believe it, but I can tell you, having lived it for many years, it's true. The intel agencies have a big effect on what is broadcast on television and what you see on Facebook and Google as well. I mean, they're all up and down Facebook and Google, as I'm sure you know. And, there are a lot of anchors who, including people I know well and have worked with at different networks. I'm thinking of one in particular, a national security reporter who was just a mouthpiece for the Pentagon and the CIA and is knowingly telling lies on their behalf. That's very, very common, very common. And I can think of a number of people at CNN who I know for a fact are doing that exact thing.
Okay, so just stop for a second. Tucker Carlson, who used to have a hit show at CNN, back when CNN tried, at least remotely, to be balanced, Tucker Carlson anchored Crossfire, which was like the biggest show in the country. Tucker Carlson knows the staff at CNN. He knows them very, very well. The staff at CNN are obsessed with Tucker Carlson. The news gathering circles in Washington, D.C. are incredibly small and getting much smaller these days as corporate news fires their reporters. And so Tucker Carlson knows these people and all but confirmed that Operation Mockingbird effectively runs CNN, that the CIA and the intel agencies run CNN. So important. Keep listening.
And so, they're reading government propaganda from the intel agencies knowingly. And I'm sure they've got some internal rationale that allows them to get up in the morning and face themselves despite having done something that dishonest. But I'm just telling you, bottom line, I know that is true. I'm not speculating at all. And in particular on the national security stuff, there are very well-known national security reporters, and I'm thinking of one female national security reporter in particular, who just reads lies from the national security state. And it's wildly frustrating. And it would just make me mad. Even if I don't agree with the lies, okay, but even if I did agree with the lies, I would be offended because they're lies. They're lies. Like when CIA and the Pentagon were claiming that Bashar al-Assad used poison gas against his own people. Okay, there was no evidence that was true. Maybe it was true. There was no evidence it was true. None. Zero. And I called them out and they could not provide any evidence. And yet every national security, and it was a big deal. We killed a lot of people in response. We sent in missiles and killed a lot of people. We took human life in response to that claim. And it was, as far as I can tell, a lie. And every national security reporter, every channel repeated it uncritically. The Biden administration blew up Nord Stream and, created the largest act of industrial sabotage in history, the largest man-made CO2 emission in history, an environmental crime. This is a huge deal. This happened. And every national security reporter just looked right into the camera and said, well, we think Russia did it. Well, they knew Russia didn't do it. That's a lie. And they knew it was a lie. So I just think, and again, I'm not speculating. I spent my life in this business, so I've seen it. People underestimate the degree to which the people sitting on the news, possibly even Wolf Blitzer, are repeating talking points from the intel agencies and doing it on purpose. It's scary, man. Really scary.
Scary, man, says Tucker Carlson. I simply use Wikipedia to bring forth these sources to you. I have a damning video that you're going to want to see. In a 1973 document called The Family Jewels, published by the CIA, containing a reference to Project Mockingbird, which was the name of an operation in 1963, which wiretapped journalists and had publishers publish articles. Ladies and gentlemen, in the Church Committee, which was the last time the United States government decided to surveil and look into the operations of the CIA.
Rabbit. Thank you for all you do.
They uncovered that the CIA was, in fact, paying personalities in print, in TV. This was in the 1970s, so you didn't have the internet yet, and in the newswire service. And then some of the heads of the news services, like CBS, straight up admit to it. Watch.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Just say it in front of people.
Name the news organization.
What do you got to hide?
That remains to be decided. I think it was entirely in order for our correspondents at that time to make use of the CIA agent chiefs of station and other members of the executive staff of CIA as sources of information which were useful in their assessments of world conditions.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
So, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is Tucker Carlson straight up saying that is still operational 50 years later. Of course, our politicians are cowards. They didn't do anything to stop this, and so now we must live inside of this psyop state that has total and complete control in order to manipulate the masses. It was just why we would do the work every single day, waking people up on this channel. Tucker Carlson saying the CIA is knowingly telling lies to journalists who repeat them unquestioningly, and we'll never know why. Tucker Carlson, the people in DC are stupid. I wouldn't let Fauci give my wife a pedicure. Yeah, gross. Can you imagine something worse than Dr. Fauci touching your wife or you with a needle or anything? Ugh.
Living next to my brother, who I'm really close to, my best friend, and now we live together again in another state. And so I spent my whole life with my brother, and he spent, like me, his whole life in Washington. So, from high school on. And we go for a walk every single morning with 7 dogs, and we climb this mountain every single morning. And we always talk about Washington, where we spend our lives. And we have no respect for the people who live there. We don't think they're smart. Both of us think they're stupid. And we don't think that because we saw it on the internet. We think that because we live next to them for 35 years. I have no respect for them at all. Nothing they have done works. They should not be in charge. They're not worthy of it. They're too stupid, actually. So like, it's just so funny that the conceit that they're smart. So what do they call themselves? I'm a wonk. You think I'm smart? They've never read a freaking book. I mean, these are like truly dumb people. And somehow they've hoodwinked the nation into thinking they're experts in something. Like, I literally wouldn't hire Anthony Fauci to do anything other than apply for government grants. That's the only thing he's good at. I would not hire him to run a business. I would not hire him to cure my cold. I wouldn't have him give my wife a pedicure. He's not qualified. Like, these people are not impressive. That's the actual truth.
Yeah. Well, these people are terrified about what Tucker Carlson is about to do to them. Chadwick Moore, who is the official biographer of Tucker Carlson, saying effectively that Tucker's next big interview is going to be with a man named Larry Sinclair, somebody who had all the press, and Tucker Carlson in his corporate media shackles were not allowed to interview because Larry Sinclair has very detailed sworn affidavit and lawyered up allegations against Barack Obama. Let's just call it sexual encounters with Barack Obama, which also include drug paraphernalia and so on and so forth. And then Larry Sinclair, of course, was persecuted by the Biden family for these revelations because Joe was on the ticket. Ooh, man, that's going to be juicy. Tucker Carlson again saying that they're going to stop at nothing from assassinating, effectively, Donald Trump. If you begin with criticism, then you go to protest, then you go to impeachment, now you go to indictment, and none of them work. What's next? Graph it out. We are speeding towards assassination, obviously. Yikes. Ooh, man, yikes. There's something about Trump that's so threatening, they just can't have it. Ladies and gentlemen, Tucker Carlson up with this interview with Donald Trump. 250 million views. Arguably the most viewed interview in human history, depending on the metric. Tucker Carlson, again, crossing the 10 million person follower threshold on Twitter, which is something else, which is tough, baby. That is a tough one to crack. Tucker Carlson is rocking and rolling. He's the greatest threat to the system as we know it. And he has become more powerful since they struck him down. You'll love to see it. The hero's arc. It's your boy, Benny. Like, share, and subscribe to Destroy the Communist.
All right. What do you guys think of that? Interesting, yet predictable.
Yeah.
I'm glad Tucker is calling these people out. I think we always knew that these guys were up to something, right? But like I said, the narrative is always distributed and recited. It's the establishment narrative. It's the first veil, of course. You know, they're the experts. They're the ones with the background and propaganda and psychology and
they know
and the
what's
think
best,
tanks.
yeah.
Yep, they got the whole catalog. They got the playbook. They wrote the playbook.
The fabricated statistics.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Backdated papers that didn't exist. Yeah. But the thing is, like, what kills me is just how do they not, or maybe they just don't care, know that when they're televised, when we're seeing them, when they say, I'd rather talk to you in private. I'd rather talk to you in private. Like Ollie North with the I do not recollect. I have no recollection of that. I do not remember. Dude, like, you're in the military. There's no way something this big you don't fucking remember the details. But he's gonna sit there and no, I have no recollection of that. I have no recollection of that. I have that. No, that's a lie, but it's an unprovable lie. And it looks so bad to us. And it makes me wonder why more people don't look and go, you know, I'm tired of this bullshit. I'm tired of being lied to. Why can't I like get some truth out of these people? Contact their government or whatever, or get with like-minded people and, you know, get the correct information out and point out all the different fallacies that we're being basically drowned in. I mean, I feel like there's like a hat somewhere in the White House with just a bunch of ideas in it. And they're like, who's picking today? You come on down. And they just pick a freaking distraction out of the hat and go, okay, this week we're going to do this. Because it's all they do. Whenever we stand up, they're like, okay, yeah, I hear you. But, oh, look over there. It's very like magicians do that to fool you. So I never would have thought my government would have done that because I grew up with this idea that we were this idealistic, honest, for the people, by the people, country and government. And yet we're not. We're nowhere near that. We're so the antithesis of that it's ridiculous. The people are still all about it, but the ones with all the power are not. So how do you, reconcile that without doing things like this, like what you're doing? Like, I address mental health stuff because I think that's a real problem. I think that's one of the ways they control us. The government is the ultimate covert narcissist. I mean, that's all they do. And it takes a while to see it because you're in it. Like the other one said, you're
That's right.
immersed in it. You're drowning in it.
That's right. The fish rots from the head down, right? And what you just described earlier in your statement was that, the same thing we all go through, right? But what you were describing was the unveiling of the first veil and then entering into the second. See, once you get to the point where you've realized that the government isn't the things that you thought when you were growing up, isn't this benevolent thing that's trying to do the right thing, even in a world full of madness. It's all outside the borders, evidently, right? You learn that the madness is inside the borders. You learn the madness is coming through the information that you thought was there to protect you. And that is what's called waking up. Right? Once you wake up, the first veil drops, right? So where do you go? You have to find a new source of information. You have to find new narratives, and that will lead you into the second veil, where there's a whole nother world of landmines and rabbit holes to fall into with grifters at the bottom of all of them, right? And that's what we cover on Unveiling Reality on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m., 8 p.m. Get my schedule straight. Yeah. So, and that's the point. You see where this information led me to understand that, and that's where waking up at this time period led me into the second veil. Once you had to go through that, then you learn that, hey, you also have to wake up to more exploitation in the second veil that was similar to the first veil. It's just different. It's just, word differently. Everything has elements of truth sprinkled in, as these guys pointed out so clearly. Right. It has to. So there is things when you use things like the trivium, and you are critical thinker, and you talk to other people and you listen instead of argue. You discuss instead of, argue about things or fight about them. Right. Then you can go mentally about it when you don't fall for the BS again. Right. And for some people, there's a second awakening, right? I thought the aliens were going to come save us. I thought, these things were this and these things were that. Right. You have to wake up again and realize there's just as much disinformation in the second veil. And that's when we unveil the third and fourth veil. So we understand that there's the cycle, like you said, cycle of abuse, this abuse that's going on. All these things have elements of abuse in them, right? And what does that abuse do? It corrupts people. What does corruption do? It causes crime. It causes division. It causes all these things, and thus enabling the cycle of
that
control
never goes away
to continue. Right. And keep the elitists, the ultimate malignants among us, right, to continue to have generational wealth and power. And by learning these things, we can then put our minds to work on the fifth veil, which is solution culture, and how we're going to remove the enablement from these institutions and these individuals so that we can have a more honest world to live in, a more honest system to prosper in and protect us from the evil that's out there. The ideal situation is that we can flip the scales to minimize the corruption and elevate the integrity so that we can actually have an honest go at this thing called civilization and give humanity the leading role in it.
I think that's the best you've ever described one stage to another.
Clip it. Don't forget.
And clip me complimenting him, because that don't happen that often. But it's just weird because like as this was going, and they were showing like the Skull and Bones group and all that, I was thinking about the education and how different the elite education is at the places that none of us could ever afford to, no matter how many student loans we took out, because they wouldn't accept us. And what we learn in public and even parochial or private school, because the history and the facts and the rhetoric that's given to us is so different than what they learn. because they're being positioned to be put in positions of power later. And we're being put in positions of ignorance so that we go along like sheep. And that's one of the ways they've attacked us, I feel, through education. And they continue to evolve that to make the education less informative, less fact-based, and more emotional and social. And let's worry about social groups. Forget, you don't have to add. We have, machines that do that for you now. So it's like they're taking our ability to think and calculate and see things away and just keeping us as like ignorant children, because they make us afraid. Kids are afraid because they're not sure of what's out there. And now they're doing that to us. They're not uneducating, but they're severely lacking in education. I mean, as a whole. I mean, they say that our statistics are low, but they never tell you exactly what that means. That most people graduating high school only have a second grade education level, in the 12th grade. So what they do for 10 years, learn nothing? No, they learn the same shit over and over and over, which is why I never got to certain wars. I never got to certain topics in government, because they made sure to fill enough of a year with crap so that you never reach that information. You don't have time. And it's okay because, they taught for 180 days. But the education system really it starts so young on us. Like they start that at 3, 4, 5 years old.
Oh yeah.
And it's just, it boggles my mind, the differences. Like these people play the long game. We're just out here to survive. And they created that. They made it so that we struggle day to day while they're sitting pretty, and they can just do whatever they want. They can plan 50 years ahead. They know they're going to be there. We don't. That's a big difference. It's a big difference in what's the word I'm looking for? Privilege, I guess. They have a more privileged life in that they're secure in their positions. They're secure in their power. They just want to, get more. And we have, like, for all of I can see, we've had no power. We've just been playing to their fiddle. Like they play, we dance. I'm excited that we're all, like, so many people are waking up and seeing it. I mean, I'm glad I'm one of them, trust me, but it's difficult to think, holy shit, what have I been looking at my whole life? And how easy was it for them to pull the wool over my eyes and keep it? Even if you got to see like one thing, everything else was against you. There were so many, like spinning plates in the air. You couldn't just stop and look at one. You had a rush to keep going. And that's what we do. We rush all the time. We don't savor things. We don't think about things. It's always the knee-jerk reaction. Hi, Jess. Hi, Valhalla. I'm sorry, I rambled. Go ahead.
No, you're good. You know what? That made me think there's a documentary out there, I believe, called The Dumbing Down of America. And we'll have to do that one too. And that will be a good one for when we have a teacher right here too. You'll have a lot to say that one too. So yeah,
there's
coming up, we'll do that.
Disparity in the quality and the quantity. They go longer than we do too, because they can afford to. They don't have to go out and get jobs. They're rich. They could go to school till they're 42 and get 9 PhDs. I can't do that. And they could pay people to get them for them, which they probably do because they're dumb as rocks. I mean, we have people in the Senate, like we have actual congressmen and senators that are nearing like 100, if not over 100. They can't drive, but we let them make decisions for the country. It's a little sus. I mean, term limits would be great.
It would, and a lot of other work to be done there as well. I mean, honestly, the reason that they're able to do this generationally is because we are divided. And how do we get divided? It's the control of language. It's the ability to narrow in the keep a narrow narrative, a narrow narrative. Keep people boxed in with a narrow narrative, right? That then helps the division, the omitted history, the confusion amongst people, the turning one against the other, right? And like we talk about on Thursday Nights with Gary Lamb, how that division is effective in keeping us from coming to reasonable conclusions, right? And seeing the corruption for what it is and where it is.
Well, if you think about it, like, what is the one key to success in any endeavor, in education, in behavioral restructuring, in the government, in putting out, like promoting yourself? It's always consistency. They are consistent because they can be. We don't get the consistency because we live more hectic, like survivalist lives, if you think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we don't get to do that.
They keep stirring the pot, right? They keep throwing one thing
Keep you
after another
hopping.
at us. Well, they keep you in that survival state, that fight or flight state of mind, that anxious mentality, right? Because
Which
they're
leads
always
to a
hitting
lot
us
of the
with the
mental
fear-based
issues we're
stuff.
seeing, Like, there's a reason why mental illness has gone up so substantially, because they're literally playing with people's minds. They're literally like invoking anxiety and paranoia and, all
By
these
design.
disorders that didn't even exist before.
By design. Yeah. And that,
Yeah.
and like, it's so, and then you say, well, how in the world? That seems like so complicated to put a design
It's
out
not that
there.
hard.
It's no, well, it's it's self-replicating. So the system itself self-replicates it through the corruption. Like, you have to have people that have been broken and corrupted in order to run these type of operations. Then it's just going about business as usual for them. They don't see it the same way. We can take a high level look at it. We take a step back and take a look in. This is what we're seeing. But when you're in the middle of it, like a lot of things, you can get caught up in it. You can not see the finer points, and that's the purpose of veils, right? Veils keep you from the truth, right? Because you're just mixed in it. But when those veils come down, man, it's a moment of clarity that is life changing.
It's terrifying.
In all walks of life. It could be about a friend. It could be about a person. It could be about your the type of work you do, or it could be about your government. It's just, there's all kinds of things that shade us from the truth, and it's up to us to keep a critical mind and have the tools to be able to see through these veils. Yeah, you got to have good energy and let your spirits rise up and dance. That's right, Scott Free Freedom. That's right.
Absolutely.
And tell you what,
Just
Scott
don't
Free
dance
Freedom knows
to
how to do
their
that.
tune.
He does.
Like, we need to dance to our own song, the song of the people. They used to do that.
Yep. We did. Well, I guess at one time we did, but there's always going to be. You see, as soon as you relax, as soon as you take a deep breath and think, "Oh, you're in the clear," they come out of the woodwork, don't they? They come out of the woodwork and they start infiltrating, and they always do it wearing a mask. Like, that's why, like, we talk about the narcissism
Lately,
epidemic.
literally.
It's an epidemic on display. I mean, literally, if you open your eyes and you look around, you can see there is an epidemic going on. It starts in the mind, right? So, but people like this crowd right here, this crowd has got their minds open. They can see the truth. They're here to do something about it. They're here to be part of solution culture, which is what we do here. And all week long, all week long.
All week. We each got a day covered.
That's right. So tell me, Shelley, what you got coming up this week?
Oh, well, tomorrow, being that tomorrow is the anniversary of 9/11, and they're going to make sure that we pay homage, I figured I'd do a little something, a little like talking about it at first, just because there were people that died and they deserve, remembrance, and they deserve that. The end result of that,
you had a firsthand view of it, by the way. I mean, a lot of people don't know that. Shelley had a front row seat almost, right?
I live less than a mile across the river, directly across the river from the World Trade Center. I mean, the World Trade Center was to my right and Empire State Center to my left, Chrysler Building right in front of me. And way off to the right is the Statue of Liberty. But I literally, I'm a block from the water, and my job was a block from the water, and it was right. I watched it out the window. It was absolutely terrifying, because the first one was like, okay, it's on fire. You have no idea out there how many times that building had been on fire. Like, so many things hit it, or heaters exploded, or whatever. And then we went through the whole truck thing, which, most of us knew some of the guys, or knew people related to them. My daughter's pediatrician was the brother of one of the terrorists. It was like, oh my God. So, suffice to say, I switched pediatricians, but it was right there. And I remember when I stepped out of my office after the first building went down, and I went out on the street to get to the car because my husband was waiting on the corner, and nobody was moving. Like, you had people just standing on the sidewalk. They'd be walking, and all of a sudden they just stop, and they looked like they were in like some sleepwalking state. Like their brains could not accept what was going down because we were right there. You could smell it. You could smell, the concrete burning. You could smell the remains because you could. Hair and flesh have a very distinct smell. There's no covering that. If you know what it smells like, you will smell it anywhere. And there was that for weeks that went on. But right then, nobody was moving. Like they they could not function. And I remember some lady was just standing there, and I went up to her and I hugged her. I didn't even know this lady, and I was not a hugger back then, guys. Not at all. Now I'm a hugger. But then, no. And I held on to her because she was just shaking because she just had no idea what to do now. Like, we'd never had something that close. But
so you're gonna do that tomorrow, right? And then you
I
have
wanted
a
to
show
just a little
3 days a
something
week.
on that. But I wanted to do self-care because I think it's a really good time to bring up self-care on a day like that. When people are focusing on the negative, the only way to combat that is to bring in the positive. Make yourself stronger. Make yourself feel better. Fight what you don't think is right. And you have to be aware and alert to do that. And I think part of self-care is learning to understand your surroundings and not just become numb to it.
Hey, Heidi, how you
You
doing?
have to feel. Apathy is a big thing now. And that's what I want to focus on.
All right.
Oh,
So
Heidi, ho.
when can people find the show? What time? What days?
So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 a.m. It's Coffee and Chaos with me, T3. And yeah, tomorrow we'll be doing 9/11 and self-care. And they honestly do go together. So
there you go. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna do a little something tomorrow evening. I might do something tomorrow evening. Let's look for a show to pop up for me. I gotta finish it up and might have a little something in store, a little something special. But just look for that. And then of course on Wednesday, Unveiling Reality, 8 p.m. Eastern. We've talked about that. We talked about Thursday. That's Repairing History with Gary Lamb. That's on at 7 p.m. I think we're gonna make it a new time, 7 p.m. So we can get some more people in there. Yeah, happy birthday, Shizzy. Oh man, hold on.
Oh.
I thank you for saying that because you reminded me of something important.
He is 33 years old. It's a sweater. It's a sweater.
And Shizzy was wearing his sweater today, I bet. Out there enjoying his new Winning Reality sweater. And I think Fahala waits for guest starring in that as well, helping me make that an awesome birthday just for Shizzy Wisma. Happy birthday, Shizzy. He is 33 years old. A guapo is 33. All right. I know. But I thank you for reminding me of that too, Shelly. I'll be back next Saturday as well at 9 p.m. for Winning Saturday Night. I'm not sure who is up this week, but it'll, as always, be a surprise. Now, when this week comes out, usually about Wednesday. At this point, it may come out sooner, but usually about Wednesday. And that's my short that has my schedule on it. You can find all the links in that short in the description, as well as all my other videos. I try to put everything in there consistently, so you can literally just click through and hit that notification on that and give me a thumbs up. So we're ready to rock when we launch, right? And you'll get the notifications, of course. Guys,
one thing.
What is it?
One thing. Shh. I'm being nice. Guys, he is severely shadow banned. So if you could share this out as much as you can, or any of his other videos that you like, or a playlist, or even his channel, that would be awesome, because this all needs to get out and be seen by so many more people. And that's just not in the YT's plan. So if you could do that, he'd appreciate it. I'm speaking for him, but whatever. He won't ask you. I will. Go ahead. I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And thank you to all the rewatch crew that made it this far. You guys rock. Make sure you leave a like and a comment. Let me know what you think. Okay. Hey guys, now we dance. And until next time, keep on winning.
The ones that warned you about. Yes, I'm Mother Nature, all the spirit waits in life. Louder and louder, I hear the ancients roar. Faster and faster, labors all the time. Tighter and tighter, oh, the lightning flash. Closer and closer, hear all your waters so deep. Oh, hear all your waters so deep. Hear all your waters so deep. And be whole again. Oh, be whole again.
This is a friendship that'll never